On Wednesday the 23rd of August, the world did something they had never done before. It landed on the south pole of the moon, the first time ever in human history. Now, will we actually find the frozen water that have captured scientists' attention for decades? We don't know. Honestly, I genuinely couldn't guess. Hopefully, it'd be a really cool discovery if they did. But who actually did this? Which country? Now, instinctively, you might think, for example, the US with its NASA program, or maybe Russia because they were the first country that actually got into space. No? Or maybe the EU. The EU's a really big market. Maybe they did it. They've got their own space program. Or China with its vast, publicised satellite network that literally controls so much. Well, no, it wasn't those either. Now, you're wrong. It's, according to the title of the video, which is obviously correct, it's India. But why India? Now, I'm sure that surprises quite a lot of you, but to be honest, they've been in this space game for a very long time.
Dr. Vikram Sarabhai is seen by some as the founding father of the Indian space program, being influential in its very first beginnings. The Russian success with the launch of Sputnik in 1957 inspired many in India, including Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, that space research was the key, the absolute key. So in 1969, the Indian Space Research Organisation ISRO was created, though eventually found itself under the Department of Space, which appeared in 1972. Developments and technological advances came soon after with their first satellite, the Aryabhati satellite being launched in 1975. Satellites, launch systems and technical systems like the cryogenic stage tested in 2007 continued over the decades. A significant turning point was in 2008 when the ISRO successfully launched 10 satellites in one single spaceflight mission. With a few more hard-earned missions, we find ourselves where we are today. Now, I've missed out tons of information from failed tests like the one in 1987 to key individuals that really did shape the organisation. NASA's history is huge and something you might be more familiar with, but so is this. But the point is that the original founders had an ambition that their program would be second to none in the application of advanced technologies to real-world problems of man and society. It is also true that no other country of a similar level to India or below has space programs even close to compete to India's.
Now, a common criticism of India is that to some people, India could be regarded as a developing country with still relatively high anyway, number of people in poverty. So why spend all that money on tech, very expensive tech to be honest, when all of that money could be used on poverty alleviation? It doesn't quite make sense to some people, and it's certainly a question that I had. But ultimately, it shouldn't be me that answers that question. It should be Indians themselves.
Vasudev Van Makuth, a science editor at The Wire, made many points opposing this general view. His arguments can be briefly summarised as follows, but I really would recommend actually checking out his article. So number one, poverty alleviation is more than simply giving money. It's policy and infrastructure reforms to enable people to have a healthier life, better education and so on. The knowledge gained won't be lost but can be used for other things. NASA and the Apollo 11 moon landing is credited with many technologies that would otherwise not have been developed. Everything from CAT scans to LED lights and camera phones. Point number two. India's spaceflight is not separated from poverty. Satellites, in India as in countries like the US, has been used to improve access to education and healthcare in rural areas and monitor the consequences of natural disasters, saving tens of thousands of lives every year. Point number three. India's focus on space is not at a cost of poverty alleviation. If anything, it pales in comparison. The organisation's budget is a tiny proportion of the government's overall expenditure. By not engaging in this exploration, India might lose out on more longer-term benefits. An interesting example given was mobile phones. The ability of having a mobile phone opens up so many possibilities. Irrespective of how costly or expensive they might be, this is why mobile phones are seen as a necessity by many people, despite how poor they might be.
But ultimately, if you're laying all of these criticisms on India, you have to do it for other developed spacefaring nations like the US. The US is no real different. It has its own health crisis, it's got its own homeless problem. Just look at Hell's Kitchen or Los Angeles for that. It's debatable in terms of spectrum, but the core principle of the argument pretty much remains the same. So you can't treat India as being very different to the US, for example. Now, it's really key to understand that I'm only really talking about space and this specific example. If you had a dictator that had a terrible agricultural system and the infrastructure needed a lot of money to save people's lives, then obviously that's where the money needs to go. But ultimately, if you actually look at the data, assuming that it's correct, Vadasavan is actually correct. According to the UNDP's Multinational Poverty Index, India reduced its poverty to 14.96% in 2019 to 2021. This shows that the people weren't the cost in this space journey, this space race, if it can be described as that anymore. The people don't need to suffer. Now, ultimately, it's not even us, people like me, that get to make that choice. It's Indians themselves, not me, some foreigner that literally just listens on the news. My opinion doesn't really matter where this comes into it. And ultimately, it's important to realise as well that sometimes you can do it a lot better than the best. Many people probably thought that India weren't capable of this, and America were the only country, maybe China or Russia, that could have even achieved this feat. But India proved all of those wrong. It's really important to understand that stereotypes can't cloud your judgments. You need to focus on facts. Stereotypes are great for coming to conclusions faster, but they often cloud what the real answer is. And you can't let them stop us moving forward either. That's the main goal.
India is already in the world spotlight. The moon landing just cements that further. For better or for worse, India's population is likely to be the largest in the world very soon too. The moon, the solar system, and the space beyond that is a new area to explore. With many countries vying for influence and space, this is a concerning prospect with space law and the rules currently still being uncertain. And this has happened before too. In the scramble for Africa, when European nations decided to redraw the map of Africa to their own conquests, they overrid any of the pre-existing boundaries of local tribes. Little consideration was given to the people and consequences of a place Europe often called the Dark Continent. Scientists hope that moon ice could exist in enough quantities to be a source of drinking water and possibly support missions to Mars. While the 1967 UN Outer Space Treaty stops any nation claiming ownership of the moon, it doesn't stop commercial operations. Without anyone or any single organisation owning it, how can countries be denied access to the moon, to space, to the solar system? Right now, there'd be no stopping it. The expedition into space is not something a single country is doing, but something the human species, the human race is doing. The world will need to come to the same cooperation as it has done in the United Nations, and even more so. Only by doing this will we ensure that we don't cause irreparable damage or harm to the environment or any living species, ourselves, plants, or anything that we might find in this next frontier.
A key goal of the ISRO was that it would be second to none in the advancement of technology to the problems of man and society. And it has done just that, and it continues to do just that. There has been many times throughout history where there have been inventions or challenges, and anything that's come out of it hasn't actually been used for the common good. But yet, here we are, people are still pushing the boundaries of what's possible and trying to do something for everyone. India has showed that we shouldn't be stopped by what others think of us or even by our own anxieties, but more importantly, they've added their voice to ultimately how we should all look to the future and lead ourselves.